I'm going to go ahead and call this work session to order on number 2019-79, an ordinance amending Anchorage Municipal Code to prohibit the sale of metallic wire that has been burned to remove insulation to scrap metal dealers. Let's go ahead and do introductions, starting with John. Pete.
I'm Pete Peterson. This is John Welton here.
Forrest Dunbar.
Sorry, I distracted her. Make Xylitol. That's my fault.
Christopher Constant.
Austin Quinn Davidson.
Susanna Brown.
Felix Brown.
Crystal Kennedy.
Team City Council.
Sadie Edmondson McGorn.
All right. And then, do we have any folks from the departments that are going to be speaking on this? You can introduce yourselves, please.
I'm Brian Dean, fire investigator with Anchorage Fire.
Jody Hetrick, Anchorage Fire Chief.
I'm Sergeant Gregory Lee with the Anchorage Police Department with the burglary section.
Okay.
You got attorneys in the back too.
Oh, sure, yeah, if anyone else is going to speak to it. Yeah.
Jessica Willoughby, I co-draft it with a family member in Austin.
Great.
Todd Sherwood, Assistant Municipal Attorney. I drafted the underlying ordinance scrap up.
Okay. All right. Okay, if no one else is speaking to it, Mr. Constant, you want to go ahead and roll us through this?
So in front of you, you have 2019-79 proposed, an ordinance that will prohibit the sale of metallic wire that's been burned. And a couple of years ago, I had the fortune to enjoy a dinner at Firehouse 12, which is off of Seward Highway near Diamond. And in the course of conversation at that dinner, as I've always been sensitive to the issues of homelessness in town, they mentioned that in their part of town, they see a different kind of phenomenon going on where in the camps, they're finding people burning wood wire and creating this really noxious, toxic smoke and creating a hazardous environment for the people who are in the woods and also for the people who have to respond into the woods. And this poisonous air has in fact been proven to be carcinogenic and really, really bad. And so a member of the Anchorage Fire Department and I had lunch a while back, and it was suggested that this be a proposal that I move forward, and it's in comportment with what I'd like to see happen, which is a cleaner environment, cleaner community, safer for our first responders, safer for our neighbors. I've been in a camp where the smoke hits an inversion and flows straight into the houses that directly abut the greenbelts. That would be on the south side of Chester Creek. They're tucked in between Fireweed, the highway, and the creek. And so a lot of people are put at risk by this. The drafting has been done by Ms. Willoughby, and as I was eavesdropping on some little conversations in the back there might be some suggested improvements. But with that, I don't know that I need to go through every item, but maybe we'll hear briefly from the chief or who she designates about why this is important. And I see Officer Carson just walked in. Captain Carson.
I will start the conversation first, just as a reminder to everyone. Under current municipal code, it is illegal for people to burn scrap, construction products, anything other than your food, if you're barbecuing, really is where we're at with the municipality because of air quality, and this kind of ties to that. So we have illegal acts where people are burning the copper wire for a specific, or any metallic wire for a specific purpose. And so if we eliminate the purpose, them benefiting from that, hopefully it will address the thefts and the potential for harm that it causes. And this is not just a thing that happens in the greenbelts. Last night, we had a senior captain from Station 9 responded to a call. We had a gentleman who was burning in his burn barrel, also illegal within the municipality. And he said he was cooking his dinner, but when they looked over what was burning in the fire, it was all scrap metal and scrap wiring that he was burning just to dispose of and get rid of. So we took care of that. However, it's not, this is more prevalent than it should be, and not just because of the current weather conditions, but because when people in general shouldn't be breathing that smoke, but definitely not firefighters and police officers who are exposed to it. So that's what we want to do. So Brian Dean is our fire investigator. He can provide detail on how this really affects us and work that they have done to get here.
So periodically as we go out on these calls, the difficulty is trying to find the person responsible for actually burning the wire. We go for a smoke investigation call. We show up and typically it's a fire pit or a barrel or some sort of device with just burning wire in it and nobody around. A lot of times we'll ask for APD's assistance on the call just because sometimes we'll encounter people out there, oftentimes not. The difficulty again becomes in identifying who actually burned the stuff. They'll burn it, they'll walk away, let it come down, and they'll come collect the wire that they burnt, and then end up taking it to the scrapper and selling it. So not being able to find the person responsible to actually cite them for illegal burning type of violations, cutting off their, or making it more difficult for them to profit from it is solution that we're pursuing.
Thank you. Does anyone else from the department want to speak on this before I turn it over to questions?
We also have APD.
Yeah. Does APD want to speak on this?
Yeah, so our concern from the follow-up side of it, from the detective division, is that we'd like to have some things defined. Written proof of evidence under subsection C, what evidence actually is. We'd like to see we need some clarification on that because we have noticed that particularly in this business, they don't necessarily adhere to the reporting requirements already. And so the more that we can define the statute gives them less wiggle room of how to get out of the requirements of it. And then under penalties, a $500 fine, I don't know that, and I don't think that it defines exactly who's going to be enforcing that, whether that's going to be code enforcement or the police department. My guess would be that it would be code enforcement, simply because this is an administrative civil function, and the police department primarily only deal in the criminal side of it. And if that's the case, then a $500 fine in a business they're likely not to pay anyways. But if we can add a provision that we could also add the possibility of them losing their business license, their ability to have a business in Anchorage if they're not going to adhere to the code, that's the penalty that has a little more weight to it, that would probably bring those outliers that aren't willing to comply into alignment if we start going through the measures and the steps to pull their business license.
Thank you. Anyone else before I turn it over to questions? Okay, so Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a few questions. And first question, is it always easy to tell if the insulation has been burned off? Like, is there a way to clean it up to remove, the charring or the smoke?
So the preferred method for removing insulation from wiring is through mechanical means, mechanical wire stripper. It's a device you can run the wire through and it'll basically cut the insulation off. Burning it off is, even amongst the scrap professionals, is not the way to do it. It's a very poor way and actually diminishes the scrap metal.
But they're doing it anyway?
Yes.
Okay. And is it, so an example then of a lawfully burned metal would be like if someone's house burns down and someone would they harvest that then?
Yes, they could potentially do that.
Okay.
I don't know if lawful is the correct word for it, because I don't think there's a lawful fire for burning the wire. I think it's one of those things that needs kind of clarification,
okay.
That they would then provide proof.
Okay.
No,
But that kind of jumped out at us. Well, what's a lawful reason that they would have that? And really, it comes down to there was an accidental fire problem at the construction site, something along those lines. And so that kind of, I think, needs to be clarified a little bit.
Okay. And I have two other questions, Mr. Chair, for now. So there's a penalty for the dealer who fails to comply. Did you consider having a penalty for the person who tries to sell it, or is that in another section, or?
Mr. Chair.
Okay.
I believe that the challenge there lies when you begin to criminalize individuals and their actions like that APD or someone has to witness the act, and the act of the sale, it would be de minimis, but the act of the receipt of it and then providing money for it is something that we actually regulate. And so we could approach it from a regulatory method instead of a criminalization method, and which to me is the more effective tool that we have, because we often find that we have rules on the books that ultimately can't be enforced, and it would probably very often be the case from the individual perspective it couldn't be enforced.
Okay, and then, Mr. Chair, the last part of my question, I guess, was along the same lines. I noticed in here that the dealer shall make a weekly report to the chief of police, which suggested to me that the police would have enforcement, but maybe that would not be the case.
That is our understanding.
I understand. Okay. And so would a dealer who suspects that the person who has, the wire, that it's been legally burned, they are not required to notify the police prior to that weekly report? No?
Anytime someone believes that illegal activity has happened, they require information. They have to require by law. So they should. Because if they knowingly take stolen property, now they have committed a crime, or take a property that is part of a crime, because they can then start becoming part of it.
So you're just so that is always implicit in any law or code. You don't have to say that because that's just how it is.
If they become part of the crime, yes.
Okay.
That's
Thank you.
I mean, I don't know if I say legal could speak on whether it needs to explicitly, but it's not. Like on most statutes, that's kind of assumed with it. They don't put that in every theft statute, every robbery statute. If you participated in any way or any step of, you could be implicit.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. LaFrance. So the queue, I have Mr. Dunbar, Ms. Salatel, Mr. Peterson, Mr. Weld. We'll start with Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, well, I don't want to rehash some of the other things that have been said, but I would like to drill down a little bit more, perhaps with the attorneys that helped draft it, on what written proof or evidence actually would look like. What does that actually mean? Can you give me a practical example of how one of these businesses could get that kind of written proof or evidence?
So Justin will be. When drafting this, that was language that was flagged as language that had been used in other jurisdictions, and as I'm not a subject matter expert, one of the things we did want to include was wire that for whatever reason was burned but not against any ordinance. So the idea of a house fire came up where something hadn't been intentional, but still maintaining value of that property. So using that language seemed like a good start to avoid including that wire that was, for example, burned in a house fire. And other jurisdictions have used that language at the state level without defining the terms in order to keep that space open.
So an example, not fortunately, we haven't had a house fire yet. I assume it sort of generates a lot of paperwork, like insurance claims and that kind of stuff. So that would clearly satisfy it. But what if someone came with like a Polaroid of a burning house and said, "My house burnt down. Here's a bunch of wire." Would that, for the scrap dealer, would that meet the evidentiary standard?
I think that written evidence would look like something like a certified document from an institution like AFB or insurance company, like a third party.
Yeah, but you say written proof or evidence. So it's all written evidence, or is it written proof or evidence, and they're two different things? So something other than written proof could also suffice, like a picture, or, I don't know, the burned doorknob from your house. I mean, does it have to be written evidence?
I think that the gray in the language was left there intentionally because I'm not defining the terms, so I'm leaving space for what that would mean. They can certainly be defined for you.
Just if I might,
Yeah,
on
sure.
that very specific topic, the things that we contemplated were all actually written in nature. The police report of a fire, the fire department's report of a fire, an insurance claim, or any number of other forms of documented evidence that some incident occurred that makes this justifiable, or perhaps it would be a work order for demolition of a place that had been burned by a third-party contractor who was then presenting this material. And so I believe really that the contemplation was primarily written documentation of some official form.
Thank you. Anything further, Mr. Dunbar?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Salto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm on the same loop here, and I think what I find confusing or hard, and I understand the grayness, but it says in C, written proof or evidence as required in subsection F, and then subsection S says provide written proof or evidence. I think it's the duplication of those words. So one doesn't mean something different than the other necessarily. One could maybe be documentation. I don't know. I'm not going to wordsmith it, but it seems like you need to have this, but you need to have this, and this needs to be the same thing. And I just feel like it's kind of spinning a bit and not very clear. And I guess I want to kind of back up really, if I may, Mr. Chair, a little bit. I'm still missing the why here.
People are getting cancer.
People are getting cancer. That's a big why, okay.
This will solve cancer.
No, this will solve cancer that comes from people who are forced by the nature of their job to walk into the woods where these wires are being burnt in a way that's more than just a random happening, but in fact a pattern over time, and we can actually make a difference.
Do we have some data? Because I feel like we're back at the trapping ordinance a little bit again, that we like say there's a problem, but I don't feel like I have anything to grasp onto yet. So I don't know.
And some of the whys is the dangerousness of it. Sorry, I can jump in here on this. We're not just, this is all being put in like a homeless camp. It's not. We generally don't see a lot of the homeless burning large amounts of wires. There's a lot amount of wire being burnt out in the woods. They're stealing it and they're creating these big fire pits and doing, stripping it and doing stuff out in the woods, which is creating a fire danger. But above and beyond that, what's happening is we're having apartment fires. We're having other structures start on fire because they're burning wire in the middle of the living room. These are the type of fires that we're responding to. This isn't just an out in the woods away. They're going to extremes to strip this wire, and it's dangerous.
Wire's still out too.
And I'd like to add on to what Lieutenant Carson said. We had a fatality with the fire department directly attributed to burning wire. That was Andy Molman, and he could tie it directly to an incident where they were responding to smoke out in the woods. They come upon a big pile of burning wire, and the insulation around that wire actually is a known carcinogen, and they were able to tie that out at the federal level that caused his cancer. So we have that information. We know that this does happen. We try to wear our air packs as in every opportunity that we can. However, on 80-degree days, when it looks like there's just a wisp of smoke in the woods, and it's probably just a small campfire, or who knows what it is, occasionally we do not wear air packs. Law enforcement, when the PD goes into the woods, they don't have air packs, so they have no way to protect their lungs in some of these situations. And we believe that it may just be that one time that you breathe it, or it could be breathing it 25 times over your career that initiates the cancer. So we do have good data on that.
Thank you. That's very, very helpful.
Thank you, Ms. Alonso. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so, I didn't know whether scrap dealers burned the insulation off themselves. Obviously, if they strip it off, that's the method they use. But I'm wondering if there's a really organized crime ring that can take the metal after they burn the insulation off and melt it further down into some sort of a copper glob. And so then you would know that it came from wire. Because I don't know if that's happening or not. Just have some thinking.
We haven't seen it.
We haven't seen it, but anytime you create a rule, they find a way to get around it. So I'm not going to say we're not going to see it. That's potentially likely. But that also could be caught on the list that would be generated. The list is getting turned over to the chief of police, and our detectives are getting it. And they got reports and tips on John Doe is stripping wire and stealing it, and they got John Doe selling wire 3 times a week. I mean, that it also can help the cases too, and help connect some of those dots on that for any of those rings that would be starting. So that's kind of a double-sided is you know, them not taking the wire, but if they are able to get it through the system, because one thing we do know about it from an element is they're geniuses when it comes to breaking the law. I mean, they will find a way to get past it. They will create case numbers or reports or fake fire, you know, arson reports or whatever. It'll get passed around. They will create it to hand to them to try and get around it. But by having the list, having the link back to the police department and the fire departments, that's where we can start catching some of that stuff.
So if I can follow up, so if someone is selling copper wire to a scrap dealer, what's copper wire selling for nowadays? Is the price high right now, or?
It's high enough that people are breaking in and stealing whole big rolls and willing to spend the time to strip it. Its metal is extremely high right now. They're one of the big things they're doing, like for stolen vehicles, things like that, for scrapping vehicles, they're cutting out the Cadillac converters and selling them and stuff. There's a lot of money in metals right now.
All right. Thank you.
Some metals, yes.
So I have Mr. Whittleton and Mr. Hudson.
You know, on this section, D reports to police, this is current code, right? The dealer shall make legal report to police. Is that being done accurately? I heard complaint to.
So what, I can answer that question. This is Bethany Jenner. She's our pawn clerk. Some of you know her. I would say she's a whip with this kind of stuff, and she runs our Leads Online program, which is the required reporting mechanism by which they do. And she can kind of explain that to you, so there's a better comprehension of it.
So right now,
Might stand here because we record. That's the microphone. That's your audience, right?
okay.
You want to see?
Yeah. So the ordinance currently requires that scrap metal dealers report once a week to the chief of police or on any form acceptable by the police department their transactions. So everything that they purchase, and I can tell you that many of them don't report, and many of them report intermittently, and all of them fail to report what they're required to. So there's a current requirement that they report the vehicle information for the people that come in, and they're required to report a description of the vehicle and license plates. They almost never provide a description of the vehicle. They will provide license plates sometimes. They're required to have the individual sign a statement saying that it's not stolen property. None of them do that. And that itself is a citable offense in the code table. And the descriptions for it, for the copper that they take in or the metal that they take in, they will describe the type, the quantity, and then the amount that they paid out. And so you were asking the value of it. It really depends on the type that was brought in, the quality of it. So I've seen transactions that are $5, that are $10, but I've also seen ones that are $25, $100. It just depends. And these are the businesses that are reporting. There are plenty of businesses that aren't, or that report intermittently when they feel like it, because there's no one who can enforce this, because this is a code enforcement function. And when we've reached out to them, they say, we don't have the staffing to enforce this. And
Are you speaking about the lack of compliance with scrap metal?
Right.
So the pawn shops themselves,
they're compliant because 6 out of the 9 pawn shops are First Cash America, First Cash. They are a nationwide corporation, so they are extremely compliant. And my primary function is pawn, so if they're not compliant, they will be very quickly because I follow up on things. And the Cash America district manager is wonderful. If there's an employee that's not doing something correctly, that employee is usually gone the next week.
So, and the smaller pawn shops that independently own, they're very law enforcement friendly. They call things in all the time. I mean, I don't have an issue with any of them. The pawn shops are a little different because they're used to the regulation.
So, I mean, it sounds like you have some influence over the pawn shops, but you don't have it over the.
Well, the pawnbrokers hold a municipal business license as well as the state. The pawnbrokers have many more requirements of them, and they're used to being regulated. There have been rules on the books for many years. The scrap metal requirements only passed a couple of years ago. There has been a state requirement. None of them were following it, but the scrap metal was in 2016 or 2017 it came on, and we had a detective go out and say, these are the requirements. They left my information. I sent letters to all the ones I could find, and gave them my contact information and how to get started with reporting, and specifically highlighted what they needed to do, and they don't do it. And I'm not code enforcement. I'm not an officer. I can't go and cite them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wells. Mr. Const.
Thank you. So a few things. Chief, can you help draft an AIM document, a statement on the data, kind of the impacts this has had on your team from the perspective of health?
Yes, we can do that.
Would be great that I could introduce as an AIM with this. As we get closer, we can lay that on the table.
Yes.
And then to APD, do you having heard that, at least how I originally framed this, that the evidence would be some form of an insurance claim or a police report or a demolition permit that established there was a fire, would that be sufficiently lawful in your mind for the definition? Okay, so then
I think as long as they provide the report, not just a number.
Right.
Otherwise, they're just showing up with a number that says this is lawful, and the scrap metal dealers will take it at face value, sure, and because it satisfies the requirement. But I think they need to attach a copy of the report to it.
And so I will work with Ms. Willoughby to draft up a couple of amendments that can be introduced with the item. But then comes the larger question that I just heard: do we, Ms. Willoughby, not require licenses of the scrap metal dealers at the local level? Do you know? Jessica?
I'm sorry. No, I don't know.
You don't know. Todd? Mr. Sherwood?
So the answer is that in the scrap metal ordinance, unlike the pawn ordinance, we do not license them.
Okay.
They would have a state business license,
Right.
but we wouldn't have any authority over that.
So such a change would be substantive enough to make it a totally different ordinance, but I would offer that on short order after this deliberation that I would come back with a second ordinance proposal to create licensing for these entities. Again, just a business license, simple enough. And so so what you'll see on Tuesday, I guess, Tuesday, is a proposed couple of amendments that would clearly define lawful a little bit better. And then one last note that there are criminal entities out there that are savvy enough to strip the wire already. I have heard reports of that from people just since this was introduced. But our purpose here isn't to solve all the world's problems, but to solve a problem. And my former neighbors at 9th and Cordova called me, I think it was Monday or Tuesday morning, because there was a massive APD presence outside of an abandoned house at 9th and Denali. And squatters had come in and taken over for a month probably. No one really knew. And they literally took every piece of copper out of the house while they were there. And so there's clearly a market for scrap metal. It's valuable enough.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Any further questions? Yes, Ms. Sutton.
Yes, thank you. I was thinking as we're starting to think about budgets, if we could get the data on the number of violations and the potentiality for fines, and kind of an idea of the impact we would have if we were able to enforce this through code enforcement, and would it pay for itself? If it's a staffing issue, would it, one, pay for itself through the generation of the fines, and would that really get down to it? Would it give some teeth to this? Because passing this is fantastic, but if we're not able to enforce it, I think that gets out pretty quickly if we're not really following up, or we're not following up on really the basic thing, which is you need to be making these reports anyway. So it's just a thought to put it out there.
Thank you, Ms. Holton. Mr. Peterson and Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do we have an idea how many scrap dealers we have in the municipality of Anchorage? How many scrap dealers are we talking about here?
It's our understanding that it's difficult to tell because if they don't register with us, with leads online, then we don't know. I think we know of 6. Yeah.
I mean, when I sent out the letters, all I had was a Google search. When there was another ordinance that we passed, the crafted precious metal, or that you guys passed, trying to identify secondhand jewelry dealers. I asked the state for a listing of business licenses. Pretty simple, you know, can whittle it down by the code how they're licensed. And they sent me an Excel spreadsheet with 17,000 businesses listed for the entire state, and their coding is not correct because pawn shops aren't even listed as pawn shops. So I tried to narrow it down, and I can look at it again and see if I can narrow it down for scrap yards. Maybe their coding is correct, and I can get back to you on that.
I just wanted an idea. I mean, I didn't know whether we had 2 or 20, you know, so.
Well, it's hard to know.
We don't know either.
Yeah, when I did a Google search, I sent letters to everyone that I could find, but that was 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago. So I can look at that and see. There are 6 scrap metal dealers registered to the Leads Online, which is where they report their transactions. I should say also that uploading documents to that is very easy. You just save it as a PDF. Take a picture of it. You can upload an image. They're already taking pictures. Some of them are taking pictures of the individual who comes in. They take a picture through a window of them in their car, so it's not a great picture, but they're not actually required to take pictures of something. Better than nothing. But they could just take a picture of the document and attach it, just like they are already with the other things. It's very simple.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Whittleton and Mr. Constant.
That's okay, thanks.
All right, thank you, Mr. Constant.
Yeah, since the idea of fine metals was brought up, gold and silver and whatnot, we intentionally left all that out of this because, you know, we aren't seeing piles of burnt gold in the woods. And so if we were, probably it would be a different conversation we're having. But so we definitely by intent left that off the table, just focusing in on the scrap-based metals.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question either to Mr. Constant or maybe Ms. Jenner. Have you received any feedback after this ordinance was introduced? I mean, probably it sounds like the dealers are not so organized, or if they would respond.
You know, I believe I was speaking with the firefighters about this, and they have actually heard from some of the scrap metal dealers that they would appreciate a tool to help. But I assure you, if we come back to the second question that's been raised today, which is creating a municipal license requirement for them, we will hear from them. And I think that will be a very lively conversation.
That would probably help us get a count.
Yes, and so I would stand by for phase 2 for the really intensive public input process. Phase 1, we just have to do this, in my opinion. We just have to do it.
Thank you, Mr. France. Mr. Whittleton.
So when I first saw this, I Googled scrap metal dealers to look for them, and I don't think realistically there were like 3. Because one had bought the other one, there was a dead phone number, and I went and emailed one when I found an email, and the other ones had forms. Would you fill out? And I filled out the form and said, hey, this company got it done. I've not heard back. So.
Thank you, Mr. Whittleton. All right, so amendments, actually, just wanted to clarify. Mr. Gates, and this is for this, not only this, but any other ordinance. So you are going to be gone most of next week, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so then...
I think we need somebody to know for July.
Okay, so I don't really want to put all of that on you, though. So if we have amendments for stuff, not only this, but anything else, let's try to get those ideas into Mr. Gates or use our Department of Law. But next week, Mr. Gates is going to be out a lot.
As relates to this ordinance proposed, Jessica Willoughby is the person who's been lead, and so if we could flow any proposed amendments through her on this one, it would be great, just to keep it whole and in line, and so, and I will have those two coming under one proposal.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.